Well, it's that time again, time for another episode of the KGOU Readers Club. Once again, I'm Logan Layden, the managing editor for KGOU, and also for State Impact Oklahoma, which is relevant to know for later in the program as I talk with one of our State Impact reporters, Beth Wallace, about combating the summer slide, when kids who are out of school for the summer sort of regress a bit as far as keeping up with their studies, interacting with teachers, and such. That discussion is coming a bit later. But first, let's highlight the book we've chosen for this episode, which is a children's picture book called Caring for Your Lion, and which was also the featured book for the 2025 Read Across Oklahoma project that's put on each year by the State Department of Libraries. I sat down with the author, prolific children's book author, and Oklahoman, Tammy Sauer. Well, it's a fun little book. I have to say, a little bit of a relief. A lot of times on the Readers Club, we do these, I'll do some sort of 400-page novel or some basically like a research paper that's been turned into a book that takes me days and days to wade through. So this was kind of a relief to have a children's book.
I'm happy to do this for you.
Well, good deal, and thanks again for joining us. So let's talk about the book which we're featuring, which is Caring for Your Lion. But before we get to that, it's one of dozens of
37 so far
children's books that you have put together. Let's talk about you. Let's get to know you a little bit. You're an Oklahoma author, although
yes,
not born in Oklahoma. Right?
I was born in Kansas, but I've lived in Oklahoma almost as long as I've lived in Kansas. So I guess that probably makes me an Okie, but we'll see.
Yeah. When did you what brings you to become a children's book author, a picture book author? I don't have any kids myself, but I have friends who do, and I always find it very difficult I don't know what to talk to them about. Like, how's school going? Interesting weather we're having here lately, right? What brought you to doing what you do now? How'd you get there?
Well, I went to Kansas State University. My plan was to be an elementary education teacher. So I was there, and my senior year in college, I had the best teacher of my whole life. Her name is Dr. Marjorie Hancock. And I think teachers are really good at noticing things about kids and what they're good at. And one day she pulled me aside after class and she said, "Tammy, you have a gift with words. You should pursue publication." And had she not said that to me, it would have not even occurred to me to try. So I'm very grateful to her. And I'm so grateful for the teachers that are out there noticing things about their students, because really it just takes one person's belief in you to really give you the courage to give something a try.
What was your very first one? I mean, you've done 37.
My very first book was called Cowboy Camp, and it turns 20 in November, and it's still in print. So that's pretty exciting.
Very, very nice. Let's talk about Caring for Your Lion, which is it's not a new book. It's not like this was just released the other day or anything. Like, it's been around
Correct.
for a few years.
Well, it came out in 2017, but it recently came out in paperback. And when the Department of Libraries, when all of those people try to determine what to do for Read Across Oklahoma, they want to get as many copies of the book in little kids' hands as possible. And it's a little bit less expensive to get the paperback rather than the hardback. And so as soon as this one became available in paperback, they contacted me to see if that would be something that we could work through. And yeah, I was honored. It's wonderful. I've had a lot of my books featured for Read Across Oklahoma. And this one's especially perfect because the event's always held at the zoo. So it was really nice to have an actual zoo animal as the star of the book.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, the Read Across Oklahoma program. And I think I'm going to talk to somebody for our next episode about that from the Department of Libraries. But in the meantime, what is Read Across Oklahoma? Is that something that they do every year, or
every year they choose a book and they focus the theme around a particular book? And so this year was Caring for Your Lion. They give the opportunity for lots of schools in the area. I think some of them were bussed in from quite a ways away, actually, but they have it open so that hundreds and hundreds of preschool kids and kindergarten kids and first grade and second grade kids are sent to the zoo. And when they get there, they all get free books. There are all kinds of activities. A free lunch is provided. And before the event, every kid who gets to be a part of Read Across Oklahoma, they get a copy of Caring for Your Lion, and so did the teachers. And so it was really fun to see the audience. So they were familiar with the book when they got to the zoo. And at the zoo, I got to perform in the elephant pavilion. So I got to read my book to probably like maybe 300 people at a time. And so I just made it really fun and really interactive. And it was a good time. It was really fun. It was great to be able to get kids excited about books and reading.
Well, it's a big kind of regret on my part. That was back in March when they had the event at the zoo. Well, I should have come out there with my recorder and recorded that and talked to some of the kids, but I guess it's too late now. But you were there.
I was there. Yes. Yeah, so I did 6 different readings of the book and to packed little area. The elephants even came by too. So I had elephants listening in, but it was really fun. I mean, I do lots of author visits, and so I'm really accustomed to speaking into big crowds. So it was a good time.
And your reach goes far beyond. I mean, you're an Oklahoma author, of course, and you're featured with Read Across Oklahoma multiple times. But as I look online here, I mean, your books have a pretty wide reach. Though you're based here in Oklahoma, they get around the whole country, probably beyond.
Beyond, actually, a lot of my
Yeah.
books are published in different languages, and so that's really fun. And I talk to that with kids about that when I do author visits too. It's really fun to know that a kid right here in Oklahoma might be reading the same book a kid is reading in France or in Spain or in South Korea. I mean, it's really exciting just to know that a kid right here can be doing the exact same thing that a kid is doing in a different part of the world. And I love that.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's also really fun to see the books done in different languages too.
Yes, indeed. Caring for Your Lion, that is the book we're actually singling out here today. And of course, it was featured for Read Across Oklahoma this year in the event that they had at the zoo earlier this year. For the parents that are listening to us right now who aren't aware of it and they go pick this up, what are you getting with Caring for Your
Oh,
Lion? Tell me about
I
it. Yeah.
I love this book. So this book is about a kid who more than anything wants a kitty. He is so ready. He has all the toys for a kitty, he has a bed for a kitty. He's got kitty marked on his calendar that he's supposed to be getting a kitty on this particular day. But if you look in the opening scene where you do see his bedroom with all of these kitty centric things, if you look outside the window, you see the pet delivery truck is dropping off a really big crate. And then when you turn the page, I'll just read you the beginning part because there's a little note that's attached to the crate.
Please
And
do. Yeah.
it says, "Congratulations on your new lion. We know you ordered a kitten, but we ran out of those. Luckily, a lion is practically the same thing. Caring for your lion is easy. Just follow this handy guide." So the book is done almost like an IKEA guide. It's like a very straight man kind of text, but the text basically tells you how easy it is to care for a lion, but you see in the illustrations, it's absolutely really, really hard to care for a lion. So I like the juxtaposition of the text and the art in this book. It was really fun to do.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk to you about the art here shortly. But as far as like, where do you come up with that idea? Like,
Okay, so I got this idea at PetSmart actually. So years ago, my son, he's now almost 25, but when he was in middle school, probably like 6th grade age, he really, really wanted a pet dwarf hamster. And I really, really didn't want him to have a pet dwarf hamster. And so he printed off all of this documentation about how wonderful they were. He printed off pictures from the internet about how adorable they were. He enlisted the help and with my husband, who's like the nice parent. And then he was just saying, "This is the one thing I want for my birthday. This is the only thing I want." And so I'm like, okay. And so he and I were at PetSmart. And while he was just so elated looking at these little dwarf hamsters, I noticed there was a rack of these pet care guides right next to them, like caring for your dwarf hamster, caring for your gerbil, caring for your gecko. And I just picked one up and I started just flipping through it. And I was like, oh my goodness, it would be really fun to write a book about a not so ordinary pet. And so I constructed it like a pet care guide for caring for a lion. So yeah, so ideas can be found at PetSmart apparently.
and the I find obviously the illustrations are extremely important for the book and engaging with the child that's reading it beyond the words. And I wanted to ask you about it because the artwork in it, the illustrations, it almost has sort of a, I don't know, it reminds me of like the 50s or the
It
60s, sort
really
of.
does. It has that kind of feel, doesn't it?
Yeah. Tell me about the illustrator, who that is. Do you work
Okay,
with them
well,
often? Yes, please.
so his name is Troy Cummings, and Troy and I met years ago at a writing conference in Indiana. I was one of the speakers, and at a writing conference, you're talking with other adults who would also like to learn how to write picture books or like to learn how to write middle grade or young adult novels. And so I was speaking about how to write picture books. Well, that's where I met Troy. And at the time, Troy, I think only maybe had one book out, maybe two. And he gave me his business card and he said, "Hey, he's like, if you ever write something where you think I might be a good fit for, please feel free to throw my name in the hat." And I was like, okay. And so I just got to know him a little bit at that conference. And then we became friends. And normally with a picture book at a publishing house, there you find an illustrator three different ways. Either my publishing house will say, "Hey, we've got these three people who we think would be a great illustrator for this book. Who would be your favorite?" Sometimes they say, "So and so is going to illustrate this book. We hope you're happy." And then sometimes they say, "Hey, do you have an illustrator wish list for this book? Who would be on it?" And so Troy was one of the people that I thought would be perfect for caring for your lion. And so if the editor and the art director agree with my choice, then they'll approach that illustrator. And if the illustrator has the time and if the manuscript really resonates with that illustrator, then that illustrator will say, yes, hopefully. And so Troy created the best art imaginable for this book. I love everything that he did. Normally, when you're working on a book, the writer and the illustrator are kept separate because a lot of times the author thinks, "Oh, this is my book." And that's not the case. It's equally the illustrator's book. And so the illustrator is not going to infringe on the writer's story. So the writer really shouldn't be saying, "Hey, this is what you should be doing for the artwork." And I do get to see early sketches and I get to make comments on the early sketches. And then the comments of mine that the art director and the editor think are really strong and will help to make the book better, they'll incorporate my comments with their comments and go back to the illustrator for the next round. Troy, he's gone on to do so many books. He's very prolific. And he and I actually have two more books out together. One is called Not Now Cow, and one is called One Sheep, Two Sheep. So far we have three books together. He's become a really good friend of mine, and I couldn't be happier with the art he's created for the stories I've written.
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, usually whenever I'm talking to authors, yeah, they're that author's book. They wrote all the words for it. You do really have to collaborate, and you can say no, right? If you see these illustrations, can you be like, "No, no, I don't like this."
Well,
Yep.
technically, that's hard to do because the illustrator's already under contract. But if I see something that I'm really, really unhappy with, I can go to my agent and say, "Hey, I'm really, really unhappy with this." And if my agent says, "Oh, yeah, you should be unhappy with this," then my agent would go to the editor and then they would have a conversation and things could get, changed. Like maybe maybe the artwork would take a different spin. I don't know, but I'm never the bad guy. My agent gets to be the bad guy, but typically I'm very happy each and every time.
Yeah, and so 37 books, and you've done three with this same illustrator, and so yeah, I mean, as I scroll through here and look at the different books, they do look very, very different. Uh,
Yes.
is Troy like your favorite one? I don't want to.
I do not
Yeah.
have a favorite. I and the thing is with illustrators, you typically don't get to meet the illustrators. A lot of the illustrators that I work with live in Europe. I mean, I've never met them. I mean, we've become online friends, but I haven't met them. I think out of all of the illustrators that I've worked with, I think I've met maybe five or six. And it's always so fun to meet the people who create the other half of the book. And illustrators always bring extra heart and extra humor to a story that I wouldn't have even come up with on my own. So I love having a partner with each book. That's pretty special.
Yeah. Um, like we've talked about 37 books so far. I assume I that you are not done
I am not done.
yet.
Next year, I just saw it's called the proof. So you get to see what a book will look like before it's all put together. I saw the proofs for my next two books. One is with Doubleday. It's called Pizzasaurus, and it just looks so good. And then the other one is called The Amazing Augustus, and it's with Disney Hyperion, and it is adorable. So I'm very happy with how they turned out. And both of those books release in March of 2026. And then I have more books in the works after that as well.
Well, sure. If you're interested in caring for your lion and finding it, are they at the public library? Where do I get it? I suppose.
You
Yeah.
can find it at the public library. My local independent bookstore is Best of Books in Edmond, and they can get you any of my books. They're wonderful. They provide all of the books that I need for author visits, and so that's been fantastic. I really like to support my local independent bookstore, and they're very supportive of me as well. This book's available in paperback. You could probably still find some hardback copies out there too, but I know for sure it's available in paperback right now.
And since it was featured as far as the Read Across Oklahoma program, does that give it like, I don't know, a special placement? Like, does that mean that all the public libraries have it available? Is that something
No,
that like,
I mean,
yeah,
they all have different ways of deciding what would be right for their collection, but I am happy that 1900 little kids got this book in their hands just because it was chosen for the Read Across Oklahoma book, and that's pretty nice.
very, very good. Well, we'll look forward to your future books, of course, but in the meantime, Caring for Your Lion is just adorable. Uh,
Yeah.
and so thanks for talking to me for a few minutes about it.
Of course. Well, thanks for reaching out. I'm really happy that I got a chance to visit with you today.
Absolutely. Tammy Sauer, the author of Caring for Your Lion. I'm Logan Layden, and this is the KGOU Readers Club. More to come after a short break. We're back with the KGOU Readers Club. I'm Logan Layden. Earlier in the hour, I promised a conversation about how to combat the summer slide. It's when kids are generally out of class, away from school, and can fall back a bit. It's important to keep them engaged intellectually, at least a little bit. Kids should have a chance to be kids, after all. But even making sure they are, reading a bit between semesters can help keep them sharp. We've actually done some reporting about this here at KGOU. One of my jobs here is as the managing editor for State Impact Oklahoma, and I get to work with great reporters you hear on our air every day. That includes education reporter Beth Wallace. She's a former teacher turned journalist herself and knows all about the summer slide. I speak with Beth, and we'll hear some of her reporting. Thank you once again, listeners, for joining us. We have a special guest here this hour. It is Beth Wallace, the education reporter for State Impact Oklahoma. Beth, you've been awfully busy lately with the recent Supreme Court decision related to the St. Isidore case, which the new social studies standards here in Oklahoma. You've been all over national. I appreciate you taking a few minutes to sit down and talk with me on my little show here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And okay, we don't get to talk like this too much on the air between the two of us. So let's get to know you just a little bit for our listeners who don't. How long have you been reporting on education with State Impact Oklahoma?
So I've been on the education beat for a little over 2 years, and I've been with State Impact for a little over 3 years.
And before that, you were doing science and environment reporting for us. Before that, we worked at KGOU as a student, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, well, I was getting my journalism degree.
Yeah. So you've been with us for a while, but your professional experience goes beyond that. You yourself were a teacher prior to your journalism career, right?
Yes, I was. For 5 years, I taught at a rural school in Okmulgee County. I was an assistant band director, and because it was a small school, I taught every grade from pre-K to 12th grade.
Well, one of the things that we're trying to focus on here on the show, we did it last episode and we'll keep doing it here this summer, is this idea of the summer slide. And it's something that we want to try to avoid for our kids. But what exactly is it? What are we talking about when we're talking about the summer slide?
So, summer slide is a phenomenon that researchers began studying in the 90s. That's when the term was coined. And what it means is students tend to backslide in the summer. When they're not receiving constant instruction, they tend to fall back in reading and math and behavioral skills. We know that kids tend to fall about 20% behind in reading and about 27% behind in math. And we also know that because they don't have that everyday routine of being around their peers and having these behavioral expectations, their behavior tends to slide as well. We know that that can cause stress and depression in children whenever they don't have a lot of activity during the summer. They just don't really have that developmental maturity to be able to prioritize activities in the summer whenever they're left alone.
Well, and it's something to be avoided, as we mentioned, although at the same time, I think about when I was a kid, and we so looked forward to that last day of school. In my elementary school, it was called Super Kids Day, the last day of school. We had a lot of fun, played games and whatnot. And I couldn't imagine a worse fate than having to continue to go to school into the summer. But as you found out with some of your reporting, it's not exactly like that, right? I mean, you can combat the summer slide without sitting in a classroom doing a daily lesson. It can be fun.
Sure. And I think, it should be, spoken with the caveat of, unless you have a really intensive summer program, you're never going to be able to fully combat that summer slide because you're not getting that full instruction, that 8 hours a day of sitting, in front of a teacher and getting testing, getting grading. But, what we do see is that schools try to kind of incorporate the best of both worlds, that students are having fun, they're going on field trips, they're doing a lot more activity-based learning, whereas they don't really have time to do that during the school year because everything is so focused on standardized testing and teaching to a test. And so, schools are able to kind of find this space between getting kids the instruction that they need and that they, kind of eat your vegetables, really what they need. But at the same time, making it a place where they're going to go to the aquarium, they're going to go to different, caves at state parks, that kind of thing, just to kind of give a bit of a carrot to coming to school in the summer.
Well, as you were someone who was teaching band, did you notice this yourself as you would go from the spring semester into the fall, that you would see this sort of falling back in the abilities of some of the kids?
Oh, absolutely. And band is predicated on students practicing and students playing together every single day. And so not only do they lose those skills from a mental standpoint, they forget kind of how to read music and think about music, but they're also losing their chops. They're also losing that ability with their mouths to form the correct embouchures, or their hands to, hold sticks the right way and play percussion instruments. So we saw it from a mental standpoint and a physical standpoint as well. And that's why, we would do summer programming with band. We did, band camp for marching band, that sort of thing, to kind of get them a head start before everything big started in the school year. They would at least have those fundamental skills with their instrument kind of back in their hands.
Well, I want to set this story up that you did. This was about a year or so ago. You actually did this coming into the fall semester of 2024. Let's listen to what you learned here. As schools head into the summer and come back in the fall, some students will be further behind than others after being out for the months-long break. It's called Summer Slide. And State Impact's Beth Wallace, reported on 2 Oklahoma schools finding solutions to keep kids active and learning year-round.
Instead of staying home this summer, Woodward middle schoolers are learning about caves during the district's free 8-week program. Alabaster Caverns State Park's Jennifer Shook leads the kids down 70 feet below ground, pointing out rock formations and teaching them about the hardness scale by scratching at the soft gypsum.
And to put this in perspective for you guys, your fingernails, everyone's fingernails, rate a 3. So I want you to watch beneath the rock. You guys can see that I don't have anything in my hand, just my nails. Whoa!
Afterward, 8th grader Emma Scarborough says her favorite part was learning about the cave formation named Martha and George Washington's bathtubs.
It's 2 tubs, like upside down tubs in the ceiling, and one of them is Martha's, and she has a headrest. and a crack in her bath. And George Washington has 2 armrests, a headrest, a footrest, and a soap dish.
Program coordinator Jesse Pingree says the students prep for each week's themed field trip with journaling, science, and craft activities. They also get social emotional learning lessons, and they're fed breakfast and lunch. She says Summer Slide isn't just about academics.
It's about their routine. We see a big shift in kids, in the summer they don't go to bed on time. They're just so used to being on technology, a phone or an iPad or something, hours and hours and hours a day. And so when they come into the classroom, they have a hard time just with socialization and sitting still and not being, constantly entertained by technology.
For programs to successfully beat the Summer Slide, they have to hit certain marks. In a recent study, the nonprofit RAND Corporation found summer school students outperformed their peers when they got 25 hours of math and 35 hours of reading. Senior researcher Catherine Augustine says the benefits of summer programs can reach into behavior too.
We did find that kids who attended at least 20 days of a summer program for 2 summers in a row, their school year teachers rated them higher or better on self-regulation and self-motivation.
The stakes are high at all schools to keep kids engaged through the break, but an especially bright spotlight is on Tulsa Public Schools. State Superintendent Ryan Walters requires the district to present monthly public status updates with a major focus on improving reading skills. At TPS's Mitchell Elementary, summer school director Tucker Hopper shows me several classes using different activities to enrich the books they're reading.
With there being a big emphasis on reading, it's very project-based. So the curriculum really pushes hands-on activities. How can we bring this to life?
Activities like kindergartners making a tie-dye-like print with color and shaving cream to make butterflies that go with the very hungry caterpillar.
And there's the colors for your butterfly.
Ooh.
Fourth graders prepare for their end-of-the-year parent night by creating a walk-through classroom experience decorated with scenes from James and the Giant Peach, complete with a performance.
As James looks around, he sees several bugs who all turn to look at him curiously.
Hello, who are you?
Good evening, young sir. I am Grasshopper at your service, and these are my friends.
Welcome, dear. I'm Ladybug. Name's Centipede. How you doing, kid?
I'm Miss Spider. It's a pleasure to meet you.
I can't believe it. You all are so amazing.
While the kids design costumes and papier-mâché a giant peach, their teacher, Tabitha Dowler, says she's pleasantly surprised at how eager they've been to read.
That is a different type of learning than we do during most of the school year. You can tell that they really understand the characters and the plot, and they just get really excited about reading the whole book all the way through.
Summer school may once have brought to mind a picture of bored kids asleep at their desks and desperate for a swimming pool. But as this summer winds down, schools are finding innovative, fun ways to keep kids engaged and ready for the school year ahead. For State Impact, I'm Beth Wallace.
Well, that was good stuff, Beth, and you had some fun yourself gathering the sources and getting the interviews for that story, I'm sure.
I got to go in a cave. It was really cool. Yeah, it was a fun story.
Well, thanks for joining me for a few minutes, Beth, today. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm Logan Layden, and this is the KGOU Readers Club. We have another segment for you coming right after a short break. Welcome back to the KGOU Readers Club. I'm Logan Layden. We've been focusing this episode on kids, children's books, and keeping them engaged over the summer break. We're going to continue with that theme now, but there's also an important anniversary that needs to be recognized: the Tulsa Race Massacre 104 years ago. When the Readers Club started, it was to highlight books on the 100th anniversary, back in 2001. I want to revisit that time with an excerpt from an interview I did with the authors of another children's book, Opal's Greenwood Oasis, Quraish Ali Lansana and Nadja Amatullah Hilton. Q, tell me about yourself and your connection to Greenwood.
Well, I am a poet and author of over 20 books. I was originally born in Enid, and lived for almost 30 years in Chicago. I've been back in the state for 2.5 years. I've been researching Black Wall Street, the Greenwood District, and the massacre for almost 20 years, with the idea, the goal of producing books and other programming in time for the centennial. I had certainly had no idea when I initially embarked upon this research that I would be an Oklahoma resident again. But that is the way that life happens. So, and I'm happy to be back in the Sooner State. So it's a little bit about me, and then we can get into the book later.
Yeah, absolutely. And Naja, for yourself, what's your connection to Greenwood and your history around it?
So I am an author and poet as well. Not as many publishings as Q, but I've got a couple. And I have been a teacher in Oklahoma for 8 years now, and a poet. I did performance poetry, and of course just written. We met actually doing a performance back when he published, or back when he edited the Breakbeat Poets anthology. And so we shared a stage together and started working together on poetry projects, education projects, as he was speaking about the things that he does. And I was working on projects about other Black towns in Oklahoma, like Tatum's, Oklahoma, and things that are connected to other friends of mine from other locations. And so when the centennial started coming up closer, he asked me if I wanted to work on some Tulsa projects with him, and I accepted.
Opal's Greenwood Oasis isn't about the massacre itself, though. And before we get into it, let's just talk a little bit, and I'll stay with you, Najee, for just a second. What were you all trying to accomplish with this children's book, Opal's Greenwood Oasis? Tell me a little about it.
Sure. So we wanted to focus on the more positive aspects of the Greenwood district and the history of that area, the history of Black ingenuity, Black genius, Black excellence, cooperation, community. We wanted to focus on those themes and talk about what Greenwood was and how successful and how happy people were before all of the bad things happened. And that was our way of introducing that to kids.
I want to get a sense of what was Greenwood like before the Tulsa Race Massacre. I think, when you hear the phrase Black Wall Street, you think of, mansions and things like this and big banks. That's not exactly what we're talking about. It's a prosperous a community, a middle class sort of community, right? Tell me a little bit about Greenwood before.
Well, there was definitely an affluent class, to be sure. There were definitely mansions in Greenwood, particularly on Standpipe Hill, which has a great deal of historical irony, which we may unpack later. But there was great affluence and economic wealth and might in Greenwood. It was at one time the most prosperous Black community in the nation, and with several folks who were worth billions of dollars in today's money. In 1921, and they were Black, right? And so, yes, there were banks, over 600 businesses, banks, churches, schools, law offices, theaters, grocery stores. It was a city within a city, as folks have often mentioned. But let's be clear, and to follow up on piggyback on what Naja mentioned, the district was built by Black hands. On land that meets at the Cherokee Creek, Osage, and Caddo reservations. And it was born of necessity, right? It was born because Oklahoma had some of the most severe, if not the most severe, Jim Crow laws in the country at that time. So it was born of necessity, but it also was born from Black ingenuity, as Naja shared, Black entrepreneurship, land ownership. And those are the things, particularly land ownership and entrepreneurship, are what distinguish Greenwood from, say, Harlem or the Hill District in Pittsburgh or Black Bottom in Detroit is that Black folks owned the land, in part because of the 13th Amendment, in part because of how Black folks got to the territory in the first place, which was via the Trail of Tears, was one of the 5 tribes, either as intermarried or freedmen or property. And so it's that land ownership aspect that distinguishes Greenwood from even Harlem. More Black folks owned, their land and their property, and built upon that land and that property in Greenwood than even Black folks who owned property in Harlem. Right? We took our cultural cues. Greenwood took its cultural cues from Harlem, from Bronxville, Chicago, but Greenwood was distinct in that Black folks owned the land and they owned the businesses on which they owned the businesses. They built those businesses themselves. Again, out of necessity, Black folks couldn't go shop beyond south of First Street, because of Jim Crow. So it was born of need, but it was also born of excellence. And what we try to do with this book and many of the projects in which Naja and I and other members of Tri-City Collective have embarked upon are emphasizing Black excellence over Black pain. Yes, the massacre is one of the most, if not the most, significant acts of racial violence in the history of this country. But what was there before? What was there before the massacre, right? What was there before the massacre was a thriving, affluent community, and it had a wealthy upper class, it had a middle class, it had a lower working class. It had a red light district. It also had churches. It had mansions. It had AC Jackson, the first doctor to perform brain surgery, lived on Standpipe Hill. So it had every aspect of a city that that Oklahoma City or Norman or Tulsa possess currently. It's just that this city was all Black.
And it was a magnet for Black people from around the country, right? Because again, you said this was different than a lot of the predominantly Black communities around the country, in that the people there actually own the land. And what was the case for people in other cities? You were still sort of subservient to the landowners, right?
The property owners, yeah. I mean, in Harlem, there was some Black ownership in Harlem, but not as widespread, not as extensive as in Greenwood. Most folks, leased their properties, rented their properties from folks who were not Black in Harlem. Same for much of the Hill District in Detroit. Black Bottom in Detroit, or the Hill District in Pittsburgh. So it's a significant distinction, and it is what a part of what drew a couple of significant migrations of Black folks who were boosted, if you will, from the South to Oklahoma. It was a place where a Black person could experience more independence, and that was a part of the draw.
Mm-hmm. Well, that also caused concern for the white community that surrounded Greenwood, right, Naja?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot that led up to that, right? There wasn't just, freedom and independence that created perhaps some unsettling thoughts, some jealousy, but there were other things that led up. Q can correct a few of my facts. He's more of a history buff, but I do know there was, the wars that had gone on before, and people coming home from the wars, and the Black people come home from the wars, having experienced life in Berlin or in France or wherever they were, where slavery and Jim Crow weren't the norm, and to have gone and been treated like a human, and then to come back to the United States, to come back home and be a second-class citizen again, or less than a citizen, be treated, even worse. It caused some unrest, and that's where terms like uppity come from, right? Where it's like, oh, this is an uppity Negro. They think that they deserve to be treated human, and I think that was a lot of it. It was kind of a powder keg at that time period after that return, and because of things like the laws changing and slavery being technically illegal, and Jim Crow being partially illegal, and people, searching for freedom, but the old guard not wanting to relinquish that freedom. It was just kind of a powder keg. And in Tulsa, where Black people were actually free in their area in Greenwood, it was like, we don't want to stand for this. We have to put them back in their place.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned World War One there, because that is significant, because you had these Black soldiers who went and fought in the war, and then they come back home to Tulsa with this sense of independence, that they went out and fought for the country just as much as the white soldiers did, and that sort of, I guess, that was a sort of a confidence that they had, and you can even see during the events of the massacre itself a little bit of that, the residual.
Well, the World War One played a significant role. Not only what happened in Tulsa, but all over the country. Go back to and think about it in terms of, yes, it was the first time Black soldiers could fight on behalf of this country, and those who survived, because millions and millions of men perished in World War One. It's just an astonishing number of folks who died, and the numbers who fought. But when those men returned from war, what did they come home to? In addition to the Spanish flu, right? In addition to and maybe brought the Spanish flu with them. But in addition to that, what the country had experienced, number one, the first of the two great migrations of Black folks from the North to the South to fill the jobs during the second industrial revolution, right? To fill those factory jobs that the men had vacated to go off, the white men in particular, had gone off, vacated to go off to war. So now those white soldiers are returning home, and there are Black folks on the other side of the assembly line at the Ford plant in Detroit. There are Black folks down the hall at the steel mill in Chicago, and so on and so forth. So that's a whole nother tension. Then you have, as Naja mentioned, in addition to that, the fact that Black men fought and died on behalf of this country for the first time, and came home with a sense of a different kind of pride and a different kind of patriotism. And within those two things was a different stance regarding Jim Crow. Jim Crow can't hold the same yoke over me. My best friend, my brother just died. I just watched people die. And the white veterans did not like that uppity Negro, as Naja put it, that uppity Negro attitude that these soldiers returned to the States with. And so you have Red Summer, and Red Summer is what? White veterans killing Black veterans because Black veterans are too uppity to maintain the Jim Crow that was there when they left.
So tell me a little bit more about the situation that led up to the massacre.
Well, there are a couple of things, and Naja, please chime in if you feel if you feel.
Sure.
There are several things that happened, right? So you have Red Summer, you have the end of the war, you have Black men and white men, veterans returning home. You have the first of the great migrations of Blacks from the North to the South during the second industrial revolution of this country. So you now have more Black folks in urban centers and living in closer proximity to whites than what those men experienced before they left. You also have unionizing. You have the rise of the dirty word some people refer to as socialism, right? And so you have unions attempting to recruit Blacks, white folks recruiting Blacks to join unions on equal footing with their white counterparts for better working conditions, better wages. The white veterans and many conservative folks did not appreciate that either. And that brought in a whole nother element, right? So the IWW meeting house in Tulsa was raided and destroyed and just before the massacre as well. You have lynchings, which actually increase after World War I. So if you imagine that, with the kind of the history that we know about of lynchings prior to, during the beginning of the Jim Crow era, during Reconstruction, but there are actually more lynchings occurring now post World War I, in part because of this uppity Negro syndrome, right? And this is a storm that occurs, right? Now, sure, you're going to add something?
I just was going to say, to kind of put that in a context that's a little less historical, even if we frame it as mindsets are shifting, right? So you had this time where America had their system set up. You had your slaves, you had your masters. And then even after that was illegal, you had your, essentially it was indentured servitude, right? Where they weren't technically slaves, but they couldn't sharecropping. They couldn't afford to do anything else. So they still lived on your plantation and they still worked your land for their, meager, for their not wages, but essentially just for their room and board. They had your indentured servitude. And then what always happens anytime you have more education, anytime you have mindsets shifting, the status quo shifting, those people are gonna resist that change. And so when the world opened up and we had to start caring, everybody on every level had to start caring about not just what was happening in their own area. It no longer was just about taking care of your own plantation and having to decide whether or not you were morally okay with the indentured servitude happening on your plantation. You had to then look at the world, and then those people, as Q already outlined, as the white men went off to the war, the Black men moved into some of those jobs, those factory jobs, those industry jobs, and then you come back and it's like, where's everybody's place, right? As every time there's a shift, where's everyone's place? And Black people had seen how things are not the same in the rest of the world, and that the negritude movement precluded the Black civil rights, the Black arts, the mindset shift that happened in the United States. That was already happening in other parts of the world. And so when they went overseas and they brought these ideas back, and of course, once upon a time, there were no printing presses, right? There were no national papers. And so as those things start to progress as well, and then you get papers from, you're in Texas or in Oklahoma, and you get papers from New York, it used to be you would never know what was happening in New York. So now you've got information from what's going on in New York, and people in New York have information of what's going on in Europe, and people in Europe know what's going on in Africa, right? So as you get more information, you start to say, this has got to change, and you're always going to have an old and a new butting heads. And I'll let Q finish with his timeline, but I just wanted to create that kind of, it's the same pattern that humans do throughout history. That's just the way humans deal or don't deal correctly with change.
There are people out there listening right now who do not even have the most basic sort of understanding of what happened when it came to the Tulsa race massacre. There's a confrontation at the courthouse. There's concern about the potential lynching of a young man who was accused of assaulting a young white girl in an elevator, which again was recanted later. But Q, if you would, just tell us what happened that night into the next morning.
Well, to actually sort of segue, and it's a natural segue, since you brought up the mobs at the courthouse, the mob of white men who came to lynch Dick Rowland, and the smaller group of Black men who went to protect Dick Rowland. A white vet saw a Black vet with an Army-issued gun, right? So this comes full circle. And Blacks, although Black men were allowed to serve, Black men on almost no occasion were issued a weapon, right? On almost no occasion. And so the white vet said, hey boy, what are you doing with that gun? Because it's an Army issued gun and you're not supposed to have that. And the Black vet said, this is my gun. And they got into a tussle over the gun. And a bullet went off. And that's what sparked the violence. That's sort of what triggered the actual violence, right? So after that incident, the Black men retreated back to Greenwood. The white men left and then returned with even greater numbers. And then essentially that's when Sheriff McCullough deputized 200 of them. So the massacre was state-sanctioned violence, and I know that's a more recent term than 1921. But the sheriff in the city of Tulsa deputized 200 white men who were allegedly given the task of going to round up Negroes and take them to 3 internment camps. But in fact, what these men did with special police badges on was burn and loot and kill. And it was the National Guard who did most of the interning of Black folks, marching them past their own smoldering homes for their own protection, right? But even so, the National Guard came late, and some members of the National Guard actually engaged in some of the shooting. So that's May 31st, right? So that's the night of May 31st. Then at 5:08 in the a.m., a whistle is blown from a brickyard or a mill, and that whistle was the signal. And so at 5:08 a.m. on June 1st, an invasion, a planned, coordinated, state-sanctioned invasion took place in Greenwood.
And that will do it for this edition of the KGOU Readers Club. Thanks again to all of our guests, past and present. I'm KGOU Managing Editor Logan Layden on KGOU, your NPR source.